Some things destroy your life loudly. A betrayal, a loss, a failure, a relationship ending. You know exactly when they happened. You can point to the moment and say, "That changed me." But the most dangerous psychological patterns rarely announce themselves this way. They enter quietly. They become routines, ways of thinking, ways of responding. Small behaviors repeated so often that eventually you stop seeing them as behaviors at all. You call them personality. You say, "This is just who I am." And that may be precisely where the danger begins, because what slowly damages the mind does not always feel painful while you are doing it. Sometimes it feels responsible. Sometimes it feels intelligent. Sometimes it feels like kindness, protection, loyalty, strength, even love. Carl Jung spent much of his work exploring the parts of human behavior that remain hidden from conscious awareness. He understood something deeply uncomfortable. A person can sincerely believe they know why they behave a certain way, while an entirely different motive operates underneath. You believe you are being patient, but perhaps you are afraid of confrontation. You believe you have forgiven someone, but perhaps you have simply buried the anger. You believe you are independent, but perhaps you are terrified of needing anyone. You believe you are humble, but perhaps you are afraid of being visible. The conscious explanation sounds reasonable. The unconscious motive remains hidden, and what remains hidden continues influencing your life. This is why psychological destruction can happen quietly. There may be no dramatic collapse. Instead, your energy disappears. Your confidence weakens. Your relationships become repetitive. Your creativity dies slowly. You stop trusting your own perception. You become increasingly disconnected from what you actually want. Then one day, you look at your life and wonder, when did I become this person? Usually, there was no single day. It happened through repetition. One small self-betrayal, then another. One emotion suppressed, then another. One boundary ignored, then another. One comparison, one excuse, one projection, one decision made to protect an identity you no longer even remember choosing, until eventually, the habit becomes structure, and the structure begins controlling the person. Jung believed psychological development requires bringing unconscious material into consciousness, not because everything unconscious is dangerous, but because what you cannot see, you cannot consciously choose. Imagine walking through your home at night. There is furniture everywhere. You know the house well, so you assume you can move through it without turning on the light. Then, you hit the same table, again and again. You become angry at the table. You blame the darkness. You blame yourself. But there is a simpler solution. Turn on the light. The furniture does not disappear. You simply stop walking into it unconsciously. That is what awareness does. And in this video, we are going to turn on the light. There are 10 habits we need to examine. Some will be obvious once you see them. Others may surprise you, because several of them are behaviors society actually rewards, and the final ones are especially dangerous, because they can disguise themselves as self-knowledge. As Jung's psychology repeatedly reminds us, the greatest danger is not always what we know is hurting us. Sometimes, it is what we have learned to defend. So as you listen, do not ask only, "Do I do this?" Ask something more difficult. What part of me needs this habit to continue? Because habits do not survive for years without serving some psychological function. Even destructive habits often protect something: an identity, a wound, a fear, a persona, a complex. And when you understand what the habit protects, you stop fighting only the symptom. You begin seeing the structure beneath it. That is where change becomes possible. So begin with the first habit. One that looks almost harmless, because nearly everyone does it. But repeated long enough, it can make you a stranger inside your own life. Habit 1. Constantly asking what other people think. There is nothing wrong with advice. Human beings need perspective. We cannot see everything alone. But there is a point where asking for perspective becomes surrendering authority. You have a decision to make. You already feel what you want. But before acting, you ask someone, then someone else, then another person. One says, "Do it." Another says, "Wait." Another says, "I would never do that." Now, instead of clarity, you have noise. So you continue asking. Eventually, you are no longer trying to understand the decision. You are searching for someone willing to take responsibility for it. This habit can become invisible because it looks thoughtful, careful, responsible. But beneath constant consultation, there may be a deeper fear. What if I trust myself and I'm wrong? That question terrifies many people, because if someone else tells you what to do, and the decision fails, part of the responsibility can be placed outside. But when you choose consciously, there is nowhere to hide. Jung understood individuation as a movement toward becoming psychologically distinct from collective expectations. This does not mean rejecting everyone else's wisdom. It means developing an inner position strong enough to hear other voices without losing your own. The problem is that many people were trained early not to trust that inner position. They learned to scan faces, read moods, anticipate reactions. Before deciding what they felt, they learned to ask, "What will everyone else think?" Over time, this becomes automatic. You choose clothes, careers, relationships, goals, even opinions, while imagining an invisible audience. The audience may not even exist anymore. Perhaps the parent whose approval you once needed is gone. Perhaps the teacher who criticized you has not seen you in decades. Perhaps the people you fear disappointing are not thinking about your choices nearly as much as you imagine. Yet their voices remain inside. This is how collective expectation becomes internalized. You carry the courtroom with you. Every decision goes on trial. Will they approve? Will they understand? Will I look foolish? Will someone judge me? And gradually, you stop asking the most important question. What do I actually think? That question sounds simple, until you have spent years avoiding it. Because discovering what you think creates responsibility. Once you know, you may have to act. You may have to disappoint someone. You may have to leave something, begin something, say no, change direction, admit that the life everyone admires does not fit you. This is why constant external validation can slowly destroy psychological autonomy. You become excellent at reading everyone, except yourself. The solution is not to stop listening to people. It is to stop outsourcing the final decision. Receive advice. Consider it. Then return to yourself. Sit with the discomfort. Ask, if nobody could approve or disapprove, what would I choose? You may not immediately know. That is fine. The ability to hear yourself may need rebuilding, but every small decision made consciously strengthens it. What do I want to eat? How do I want to spend this evening? Do I actually want to attend this? What do I think about this idea? Before reading everyone else's opinion, small decisions matter. They return authority to the place where individuation begins, inside. And once you begin recovering that authority, you become ready to see the second habit. Because sometimes, the reason you cannot hear your own voice is that you never allow your mind to become quiet. Habit 2. Filling every moment with noise. Wake up, reach for the phone, walk somewhere, put on music, drive, play a podcast, eat, watch something, work, keep another screen open. Before sleep, scroll. Then wonder, why does silence feel uncomfortable? Modern life offers endless stimulation, but psychologically, constant stimulation can serve another function: avoidance. Because when external noise stops, internal material begins appearing. Thoughts you postponed, emotions you never processed, questions you do not want to answer. The unconscious does not disappear because you are busy. It waits. Jung believed unconscious contents continually seek expression, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through emotion, sometimes through projections, sometimes through sudden thoughts that seem to appear from nowhere. But if consciousness is continuously occupied, you rarely remain still long enough to notice the pattern. Imagine a lake during a storm. The surface is constantly moving. You cannot see what lies beneath. When the wind stops, the water settles. Only then can you see deeper. Silence does something similar, and that is precisely why silence can feel threatening. You may discover that you are angry, lonely, exhausted, dissatisfied. You may realize a relationship is not working, a goal no longer matters, a decision has been waiting for months, noise postpones the encounter, but postponement has a cost. The ignored emotion does not disappear. It leaks into irritability, compulsive behavior, exhaustion, projection, restlessness. You say, I don't know why I'm so tense. Perhaps because your psyche has been trying to speak, and every available space has been filled. This does not mean abandoning entertainment or living in permanent silence. It means creating moments when nothing else is competing for your attention. Walk without headphones. Sit for 10 minutes without reaching for a screen. Drive occasionally without filling the car with sound. Allow boredom. Boredom is not always an enemy. Sometimes, it is the doorway between stimulation and inner contact. At first, your mind may become louder. Let it. Observe what repeatedly appears. Which thought returns? Which conversation are you replaying? Which fear keeps entering? Which desire keeps asking for attention? You do not have to solve everything. Simply notice, because the mind you constantly distract eventually becomes a mind you barely know. And that leads directly to the third habit, one that appears whenever an uncomfortable emotion finally becomes impossible to ignore. Habit 3. Explaining your emotions instead of feeling them. Some people become extraordinarily skilled at understanding themselves. They know psychological terminology. They can explain exactly why they react the way they do. They know where the wound began. They know the childhood pattern, the attachment pattern, the defense, the trigger. And yet, nothing changes. Why? Because understanding an emotion and experiencing an emotion are not the same thing. You can explain grief without grieving, Explain anger without allowing yourself to feel angry. Explain fear while remaining completely disconnected from the body that is afraid. This is intellectualization. The mind moves above the emotion and studies it from a safe distance. It can be useful. Reflection matters. But when analysis becomes the only relationship you have with feeling, knowledge becomes another defense. Imagine standing outside a burning house, drawing a perfect diagram of the fire. You understand where it started, how it spread, which materials are burning. The analysis may be correct, but the fire is still burning. Some emotions require more than explanation. They require contact. You say, "I know I seek approval because of my childhood." Good. But what happens inside your body when someone disapproves of you today? Can you remain there? Can you feel the discomfort without immediately explaining it away? You say, "I know I have abandonment issues." But when someone creates distance, can you experience the fear without chasing, controlling, or turning the entire moment into a psychological lecture? Jung did not believe consciousness meant becoming detached from emotion. The goal was relationship with the whole psyche. Emotion carries information. The problem begins when emotion possesses you, or when you refuse to experience it at all. Integration requires a middle position. You feel and observe. You experience and remain conscious. Perhaps anger appears. Instead of saying, "I shouldn't be angry," or immediately analyzing why, you first admit, "I am angry." Notice it. Where does it live? What boundary may have been crossed? What expectation was violated? Only after contact does interpretation become useful. Otherwise, you risk becoming someone who can explain every wound, while remaining controlled by all of them. Psychological vocabulary can describe the prison. It does not automatically open the door. For that, something must be lived. And once you begin actually feeling what you have spent years explaining, you encounter another habit, perhaps one of the most socially rewarded of all, the habit of abandoning yourself while calling it kindness. Habit 4. Saying yes when something inside you is saying no. You know the moment. Someone asks for something. Before you even think, you say, "Of course." Then, minutes later, something changes. Your body becomes tense. You feel irritated, resentful. You begin hoping the plan gets canceled. But you already said yes. So you go. You help. You give. You smile. And slowly, resentment grows toward a person who may not even know you wanted to say no. This is one of the quietest forms of self-betrayal. And because it often looks like generosity, it can continue for years. The question is, why is no so difficult? For some people, no became psychologically associated with danger. No might create conflict. No might disappoint someone. No might make you appear selfish. No might cause rejection. So the persona develops around agreeableness. I am easy. I am helpful. I don't cause problems. The identity receives approval, but the shadow receives everything the persona cannot express. Anger, frustration, desire, boundaries. Eventually, the shadow finds another route: passive aggression, withdrawal, exhaustion, sudden explosions. You believe the problem is anger, but perhaps the anger accumulated because the conscious personality was never allowed to say no. Jung's idea of the shadow is useful here. The solution is not becoming the opposite extreme, not becoming cruel, not refusing everything. Integration means recovering the psychological function hidden in the shadow. In this case, the capacity to protect your own limits. A conscious no can preserve a relationship better than a resentful yes. Because resentment changes behavior, you begin giving with hidden expectation. I did this for you, so you should. But the other person never agreed to that contract. You created it internally. This is why boundaries make relationships clearer. They reveal what is freely given, and what is given through fear. Start noticing the moment before yes. There is often a tiny pause, a sensation. Something inside already knows. Do not answer immediately. Say, "Let me think about it." That sentence creates space between request and automatic persona. Then ask, if I say yes, will I resent this later? Am I doing this because I genuinely want to? Or because I am afraid of what happens if I refuse? Sometimes, you will still choose yes, but now, it is a conscious yes. And conscious generosity feels completely different from self-abandonment. Because kindness that requires you to repeatedly betray yourself eventually stops feeling like kindness. It becomes performance, and performance leads us to the fifth habit, one that can consume enormous amounts of psychological energy without producing anything real. Habit 5. Rehearsing conversations that never happen. You are alone, but psychologically, someone else is in the room. You imagine what they might say, then what you would say. You defend yourself, explain yourself, win the argument, replay an old conversation. But this time, you say the perfect thing. Minutes pass, sometimes hours. Nothing happened outside, yet your body responds. As though the conflict were real. The heart rate changes, muscles tighten, anger returns. This habit can become exhausting, because the mind is constantly preparing for psychological battles that may never occur. Why do we do it? Often, because the imagined conversation offers control. Real interactions are unpredictable. The other person may respond in ways you cannot anticipate. But inside imagination, you control both sides. You can finally explain everything perfectly. Finally make them understand. Finally receive the apology. Finally win. The problem is that repeated imaginary conflict keeps the emotional relationship alive. Someone may have left your life years ago, yet you continue meeting them internally every night. The external relationship ended. The psychological relationship continues. Jung understood how strongly psychic energy can remain attached to unconscious material. Where attention repeatedly goes, energy follows. And if enormous amounts of attention remain tied to old arguments, less energy is available for the life happening now. Ask yourself, what am I trying to receive from this imaginary conversation? Understanding, vindication, an apology, permission to leave? Perhaps the other person will never provide it. Then the deeper work becomes, can I stop requiring them to finish something inside me? This does not mean suppressing legitimate conversations. If something needs to be said, say it when appropriate. But recognize the difference between preparing for a real conversation and compulsively rehearsing one because your psyche cannot release the need for a particular outcome. Sometimes closure is not another conversation. Sometimes closure is recognizing you have already said everything inside your head 1,000 times, and now your energy belongs somewhere else. Because every habit on this list is ultimately about energy. Where your attention goes, what your persona protects, what your shadow carries, what your unconscious continues repeating. And the next habit may consume more energy than almost any other, because it requires you to constantly measure your life against lives you were never meant to live. Habit 6. Comparing your inner life to someone else's outer life. Comparison rarely begins dramatically. You see someone succeeding, someone traveling, someone building something, someone looking confident, someone appearing deeply happy, and for a moment, you simply observe. Then a thought appears. Why am I not there yet? Suddenly, their life becomes evidence against yours. Their success becomes proof that you are behind. Their confidence exposes your insecurity. Their relationship makes your loneliness feel larger. Their progress makes your own progress seem insignificant. Nothing in your life actually changed. But within seconds, your relationship to your life changed. This is what makes comparison psychologically dangerous. You are not merely looking at another person. You are using them as a measuring instrument for your own worth. And the measurement is almost always unfair, because you compare what you know intimately about yourself with what you can see externally about them. You know your doubts, your mistakes, your delays, your private failures. You know every unfinished chapter, but you see only fragments of another person's story. Then, you build a complete psychological reality from those fragments. Jung's concept of projection helps us understand why certain people affect us so strongly. Sometimes, what fascinates or disturbs you in another person touches something unconscious within yourself. Perhaps you see someone expressing enormous confidence and immediately feel inferior. But why does their confidence have so much power over you? Maybe confidence is a quality you have not allowed yourself to develop. Perhaps visibility lives in your shadow. You were taught not to attract attention, not to appear arrogant, not to take up too much space. Then you encounter someone who does exactly that. They become psychologically charged. You may admire them, resent them, or alternate between both. But the intensity contains information. Instead of asking, "Why are they better than me?" ask, "What does this person represent that I have not yet permitted myself to become?" Maybe it is courage, freedom, discipline, creativity, independence, the ability to be seen. Suddenly, comparison becomes useful. The other person stops being a verdict and becomes a mirror. That is a completely different psychological position, because comparison says, "They have something I don't." Conscious projection asks, "What possibility in me is responding to what I see in them?" This does not mean you secretly possess every quality you admire. Development still requires work, but envy can sometimes reveal direction. You envy someone's discipline? Perhaps part of you wants greater structure. You envy their creative life? Perhaps something in you has been neglected. You envy their freedom? Ask what you continue doing solely because others expect it. The emotion becomes information. Then, return your attention to your own path. Because individuation cannot occur through imitation. You cannot become yourself by winning someone else's life. The goal is not to be ahead. Ahead of whom? There is no universal psychological timetable. One person finds purpose at 20, another at 50. One becomes successful early, then spends decades discovering who they are without success. Another wanders for years, then suddenly understands what all those years were preparing them for. A life cannot be accurately measured from one photograph, and neither can yours. So when comparison appears, do not immediately condemn yourself. Ask what has been projected. Recover whatever belongs to you. Then continue. Because the energy you spend watching someone else's path is energy unavailable for walking your own. And once comparison becomes habitual, it often creates the next destructive pattern. You begin believing that because someone else is further ahead, you should already be different. Habit 7. Turning self-improvement into self-rejection. There is a version of personal growth that is secretly built on hatred. It sounds ambitious, disciplined, motivated, but beneath everything lies one sentence: I will finally be worthy when I become someone else. So you improve, read, train, work, optimize, wake earlier, become more productive, set new goals, and every achievement creates relief. For a moment. Then the target moves. You need another level, another accomplishment, another transformation. Because the problem was never the goal. The problem was the psychological contract beneath it. I am not enough yet. As long as that sentence remains, no achievement can finish the process. The ego simply creates another condition. When I earn more, when I look different, when I become confident, when everyone respects me, when I finally succeed, then I will accept myself. But the future keeps moving. Jung's psychology offers a radically different view of development. Those structures are shaped not only by beliefs, but by questions. Questions inherited from childhood. Questions born from fear. Questions created by disappointment. Questions repeated so many times, they become indistinguishable from truth. Have you ever noticed that two people can read the same book, listen to the same conversation, or witness the same event, yet discover completely different meanings? It is not because reality changed. It is because each mind arrived carrying different questions. One searches for danger. Another searches for hope. One searches for confirmation of inadequacy. Another searches for possibility. The world they inhabit appears completely different, although they are standing in exactly the same place. This may be one of the greatest psychological illusions of all. You believe your life is responding to you, but perhaps your life has been responding to the questions hidden inside your unconscious. Carl Jung spent decades exploring dreams, symbols, myths, and human suffering. Yet beneath all of those investigations, there was one persistent discovery. The unconscious is always answering, always. The only question is, what have you been asking it? And perhaps that is the real reason your life keeps moving in the direction it does. Not because fate has already been written, but because your unconscious has been following instructions you never realized you were giving. Tonight, we are going to uncover those invisible questions, because once they become conscious, you no longer remain trapped inside answers that were never truly yours. And that may be where your real transformation begins. The question you learned before you could speak, long before you learned your first word, long before anyone asked what you wanted to become. Your mind was already asking questions, not consciously, silently, automatically. Questions without language, questions made of emotion, questions born from experience. A baby doesn't wonder, am I successful? It asks something much more fundamental. Am I safe? Will someone come when I cry? Does my existence matter? Those invisible questions become the first architecture of the psyche. Carl Jung believed that the earliest experiences of life leave impressions far deeper than memory itself, not because we consciously remember them, but because they become the emotional foundation upon which consciousness is later built. Imagine building a cathedral. Everyone admires the towers, the stained glass, the enormous doors. Almost no one ever thinks about the foundation hidden beneath the ground. Yet every stone above depends on what cannot be seen below. The human personality develops in much the same way. The adult, everyone sees. The confident professional. The devoted parent. The ambitious entrepreneur. The quiet observer. All of them stand upon invisible conclusions formed long before adulthood began. And those conclusions are rarely expressed as statements. They exist as questions. Questions repeated so consistently that the mind eventually mistakes them for reality. Imagine a little girl growing up in a home where affection appears only after achievement. Every good grade receives praise. Every mistake receives silence. Without realizing it, her unconscious begins asking, "What must I accomplish before I deserve love?" Years pass. She becomes extraordinarily successful. She reaches goals few people ever achieve. Yet every achievement feels strangely temporary. The satisfaction fades almost immediately. Why? Because the unconscious was never searching for success. It was searching for an answer. An answer to a question first asked decades earlier. Now imagine another child. Every disagreement inside the family ends with shouting. Conflict feels dangerous. Emotional honesty seems unsafe. Without understanding why, the unconscious quietly begins asking, "How do I disappear before conflict begins?" That child grows into an adult who avoids difficult conversations, accepts disrespect, suppresses emotions, calls it peace, when in reality, it is survival. Notice something extraordinary. Neither person consciously chose these questions. The questions chose them. Or perhaps more accurately, life quietly planted them before consciousness had the ability to evaluate whether they were true. This is why Jung insisted that becoming conscious is not about collecting more information. It is about discovering which invisible questions have been organizing your life all along. Most people spend years trying to change their answers. Very few ever examine the questions. Think about how often your inner dialogue begins with the word, "Why? Why does this always happen to me? Why am I never enough? Why do people always leave? Why can't I change?" Those questions seem innocent. They are not. Every question carries an assumption hidden inside it. If you ask, "Why am I always unlucky?" your unconscious immediately accepts one premise. You are unlucky. It no longer investigates whether the premise is true. It begins searching for evidence. This is one of the most remarkable characteristics of the psyche. It is astonishingly loyal, not to truth, to coherence. The unconscious prefers a painful story that feels internally consistent, rather than a liberating truth that forces identity to change. Imagine entering an enormous library. Millions of books surround you, yet someone hands you a single instruction. Find every book containing the word failure. Hours later, you emerge convinced that the entire library is about failure. Not because it was, because that was the question guiding your search. Your mind functions in exactly the same way, every morning. Without realizing it, your unconscious begins searching the world for evidence supporting its deepest questions. If the hidden question is, "Who will eventually abandon me?" you notice distance before affection, silence before kindness, rejection before acceptance. Not because those experiences dominate reality, but because your attention has been trained to recognize them first. Attention is never neutral. It follows meaning. Meaning follows identity. And identity follows the questions that have quietly shaped your perception for years. Jung often reminded his patients that consciousness expands not when we accumulate certainty, but when we become willing to question what once appeared unquestionable. That is where true psychological freedom begins. Not by replacing one belief with another, but by daring to examine the invisible questions beneath both. Perhaps, for the first time in your life, the real question is no longer, "What answer am I looking for?" Perhaps the real question is, "Who taught me to ask this question in the first place?" Because the moment that question appears, something extraordinary begins happening. The old psychological program starts losing its authority, not because someone destroyed it, because consciousness finally turned toward the place where it was created. And once awareness reaches the origin, the future no longer has to repeat the past. The questions your shadow keeps asking. There is something extraordinary about the human mind. It rarely argues with itself. Instead, it asks questions, quietly, relentlessly, patiently. And the most dangerous questions are not the ones you hear. They are the ones you never realize you are asking. Carl Jung believed that beneath every conscious thought, another conversation is taking place. A conversation hidden beneath awareness. The ego believes it is speaking. But very often, the shadow is asking the questions. Imagine standing in front of a mirror every morning. You look at your reflection, adjust your clothes, fix your hair, smile. Then you leave the house convinced you know exactly who you are. But imagine another mirror, one capable of reflecting not your face, but your unconscious. What would you see? Would you recognize yourself? Or would you discover someone you have spent years pretending not to be? Jung believed that every rejected part of the personality remains alive inside the shadow. Not silent. Alive. Waiting. Observing. Influencing. Every part of yourself that once felt unacceptable. Every emotion you buried. Every desire you judged. Every talent you abandoned. Continues existing beneath consciousness. Not demanding attention. Simply waiting for recognition. The remarkable thing is that the shadow never disappears because you ignore it. It becomes more creative. If you refuse to acknowledge your anger, it begins appearing in the people around you. If you deny your insecurity, you become obsessed with the confidence of others. If you suppress your need for approval, you begin criticizing everyone who seeks recognition. Projection is one of the shadow's favorite languages. Not because it wants to deceive you, because it desperately wants to be seen. Think about someone who constantly says, "People are so arrogant. They only think about themselves. They always want attention." Perhaps they are right. Perhaps those qualities genuinely exist. But Jung would ask another question. Why does this quality affect you so deeply? Because what barely exists inside us rarely produces overwhelming emotional reactions. It is the forgotten parts of ourselves that carry emotional electricity. That is why certain people irritate us beyond explanation. They unknowingly hold up a mirror, and the shadow recognizes itself long before consciousness does. Imagine walking through a museum filled with thousands of paintings. Most of them barely attract your attention. Then suddenly, you stop. One painting captures you completely. You cannot explain why. It feels strangely personal, almost alive. The unconscious works in much the same way. It is constantly selecting what deserves your emotional attention, not randomly. According to unfinished psychological business, this explains why two people can meet the same individual. One immediately trusts them. The other instantly dislikes them. The person has not changed. The unconscious observer has. Every perception carries the fingerprints of hidden questions. Questions the shadow has been asking for years. Questions like, who is secretly judging me? Who will eventually reject me? Who cannot be trusted? Who has the power to hurt me? Those questions quietly organize perception. Soon, the world begins providing endless evidence, not because reality has changed, because attention has become selective. Jung understood something profoundly unsettling. The unconscious does not merely remember emotional wounds. It recreates psychological conditions that allow those wounds to become visible. This is why the same conflict seems to wear different faces throughout life. Different relationship, same feeling. Different workplace, same frustration. Different friendship, same disappointment. The scenery changes. The emotional script remains astonishingly familiar. Most people blame coincidence. Jung recognized a pattern. The psyche continues asking the same unresolved question, until consciousness becomes capable of answering it differently. Not intellectually, experientially. Imagine a teacher giving the same examination every year. Not because the students failed, because the lesson has not yet been understood. Life often behaves in remarkably similar ways. The unconscious is not punishing repetition. It is seeking completion. Every recurring emotional pattern carries an invitation, not to judge yourself, but to become curious. Curiosity transforms everything. The ego asks, why is this happening to me? Curiosity asks, what part of me is this trying to reveal? The ego seeks someone to blame. Curiosity seeks something to understand. The ego defends identity. Curiosity expands it. Perhaps this is why Jung considered curiosity one of the first signs of psychological awakening. The moment you become genuinely curious about your own reactions, the unconscious begins opening doors that fear has kept locked for years. Not because you force them open, because judgment finally stepped aside long enough for truth to enter. And every truth the shadow reveals carries the same silent invitation. Not become someone else, but become someone more complete. Because the shadow has never wanted to destroy your life. It has only been waiting for the day you would become brave enough to ask better questions. The day your questions begin to change. There is a quiet moment that almost no one notices. It doesn't arrive with celebration. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't even feel extraordinary. And yet, it is the exact moment a human life begins to change. It is the moment your questions begin changing. Carl Jung spent thousands of hours listening to people describe their suffering. At first, the stories appeared completely different. A businessman overwhelmed by anxiety. A woman trapped in destructive relationships. An artist unable to finish his work. A young man terrified of disappointing everyone around him. Different lives, different circumstances, different histories. But after years of observation, Jung noticed something astonishing. Long before people's lives changed, their questions changed, not their answers, their questions. Imagine two people standing before the same locked door. The first immediately asks, why is this door closed? The second asks, what is this door protecting? Both are looking at the same reality. Yet one sees frustration, the other sees meaning. The door has not changed. Consciousness has. This is the first sign that individuation has begun. The ego searches for explanations. The self searches for understanding. There is an enormous difference between the two. Explanations often bring temporary comfort. Understanding transforms identity. Think about how often your mind searches for certainty. You want to know why someone left, why something failed, why life feels unfair, why your plans collapsed. Those questions are natural, but they usually keep your attention fixed on the outside world. Jung gently redirected attention somewhere else, not away from reality, but deeper into it. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen?" he often encouraged people to ask, "What inside me has this experience awakened?" At first, that question feels almost unfair, especially during moments of pain, because pain naturally seeks a cause, someone to blame, something to fix, something to escape. The unconscious is not interested in blame, it is interested in meaning. Imagine entering a vast cave carrying only a candle. At first, you illuminate only a few steps ahead. The darkness seems endless. Then something unexpected happens. Your eyes slowly adapt. Details begin appearing, textures, shapes, passages that were invisible only moments earlier. Nothing inside the cave changed. Your perception did. Psychological awareness follows the same principle. The moment your questions become deeper, reality begins revealing layers that were always there. Suddenly, an argument is no longer just an argument. It becomes an opportunity to observe your emotional patterns. Failure is no longer only failure. It becomes a mirror reflecting hidden beliefs. Loneliness is no longer merely the absence of company. It becomes an invitation to discover whether you have truly learned to accompany yourself. This is where many people become afraid, because deeper questions rarely produce immediate answers. Modern life teaches us to solve problems quickly. The unconscious refuses to be rushed. It unfolds, slowly, like dawn arriving over the horizon. No single second creates daylight. Yet eventually, everything becomes visible. Jung trusted this process. He believed that forcing psychological answers before consciousness was ready often created illusion instead of wisdom. This is why he listened, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, not searching for the perfect interpretation, but waiting for the psyche to reveal its own truth. The unconscious has its own rhythm, and perhaps that rhythm is wiser than our impatience. Think about a seed planted beneath the earth. Every day, someone could dig it up to check whether it is growing. Every day, the result would be the same. Nothing visible. Yet beneath the surface, everything is happening. Roots are expanding. Life is organizing itself. Transformation is already underway. The human psyche grows in much the same way. Many people abandon their inner work simply because they cannot immediately see results. They assume nothing is changing. Jung would probably smile, because some of the deepest transformations remain invisible for a long time, until one ordinary afternoon. You respond differently to a situation that once controlled you. You remain calm where you once reacted. You establish a boundary without guilt. You recognize manipulation before becoming trapped by it. You no longer chase someone who cannot love you. You no longer betray yourself just to belong. And then, almost by accident, you realize something extraordinary. The answer did not change your life. The question did. Because the moment you stopped asking, "How do I make everyone accept me?" and began asking, "Why do I need everyone to accept me?" the invisible architecture of your personality quietly began reorganizing itself. One question protected the old identity. The other invited a new one. Perhaps this is why wisdom has never been about possessing more answers. Perhaps wisdom begins the moment you become courageous enough to ask the question your old identity has spent an entire lifetime avoiding. The answers you seek cannot be found by the person you are today. There is a strange paradox hidden inside every human life. The person searching for freedom is often the very person preventing it. At first, that sounds impossible. How could the one who desperately wants to change also be the one resisting change? Carl Jung believed this paradox exists because the ego always searches for answers without realizing that it is asking them from within the limits of its current identity. Imagine standing inside a room with no windows. For your entire life, you have believed the room is the whole world. Every conclusion you reach, every opinion you form, every certainty you defend, is based entirely on what exists inside those four walls. Then one day, someone tells you there is an entire landscape beyond the room. Mountains, rivers, forests, an endless sky. Your first reaction would probably not be excitement, it would be doubt. Because accepting the existence of another world would require admitting that everything you once believed to be complete was only a tiny fragment of reality. This is exactly what happens when consciousness begins expanding. The ego does not merely fear new information, it fears the collapse of certainty. Most people think they are searching for truth, but very often, they are searching for confirmation. Confirmation that they are right. Confirmation that their fears make sense. Confirmation that the identity they have spent decades protecting should remain exactly as it is. The unconscious is astonishingly obedient. If the hidden question becomes, "Why am I impossible to love?" it quietly begins organizing perception around that belief. A delayed text message becomes rejection. A disagreement becomes abandonment. Silence becomes proof. The mind is not lying. It is filtering. Jung observed that the psyche constantly selects the experiences that reinforce the identity it already knows. Not because reality is fixed, because attention is. Imagine wearing glasses with dark lenses since childhood. After enough years, you would stop noticing the glasses. You would simply conclude that the world itself is dim. If someone removed them, the light would almost feel painful. Not because the light changed, because your perception finally did. The same thing happens psychologically. Many people do not suffer because reality is hopeless. They suffer because their unconscious interpretation has become invisible through repetition. The familiar eventually disguises itself as truth. This is why Jung encouraged people to become suspicious of their deepest certainties. Not because certainty is always wrong, but because certainty often marks the boundary of consciousness. Every time you hear yourself saying, "This is just the way I am," pause. Who taught you that? Every time you think, "People always leave," pause. Is that reality? Or is that memory speaking? Every time you conclude, "I could never do that," pause again. Who first convinced you of that limitation? These questions are uncomfortable because they expose something the ego desperately wants to hide. Many of your strongest convictions were never consciously chosen. They were inherited, absorbed, repeated, until they became indistinguishable from your own voice. Jung believed one of the greatest achievements of psychological maturity is learning to distinguish between the voice of conditioning and the voice of the self. They sound remarkably different. Conditioning speaks through urgency. The self speaks through clarity. Conditioning demands immediate certainty. The self patiently tolerates mystery. Conditioning constantly compares. The self quietly observes. Conditioning asks, "How do I become acceptable?" The self asks, "What remains true when I stop performing?" That question has the power to dismantle an entire lifetime of unconscious adaptation. Because performance cannot survive where authenticity is finally welcomed. Perhaps this explains why genuine transformation often feels strangely empty at first. The old motivations disappear. The old fears begin losing their authority. The old ambitions no longer carry the same emotional weight. Many people panic during this stage. They believe they have lost themselves. Jung would likely say something very different. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the version of yourself that was built almost entirely from unconscious answers. And before something authentic can emerge, silence must exist. Not the silence of loneliness, the silence that follows the collapse of an illusion. Imagine a theater after the final performance. The lights are off. The audience has gone home. The actors have removed their costumes. For the first time all day, the stage is completely empty. To someone arriving at that moment, it might look abandoned. But the director knows something else. The empty stage is not the end. It is preparation for an entirely new story. Perhaps your life is standing on a stage very much like that. The old performance is ending. The applause has faded. The costume no longer fits. And although the next act has not yet begun, that does not mean nothing is happening. Sometimes, the most important transformation of all occurs during the quiet moments between one identity and the next. The future you keep asking for. Imagine meeting yourself 10 years from now. Not the version you hope to become, the version you are unconsciously creating today. Would you recognize that person? Or would you be surprised to discover that your future was never built by your biggest dreams, but by your smallest, most repetitive questions? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is not passive, it is creative. Every day, it quietly organizes your emotional world around the patterns it already knows. It decides what feels familiar, what feels dangerous, what deserves attention, and what should remain invisible. Most people believe the future arrives one day at a time. Jung saw something different. He believed the future begins forming long before events appear. It begins inside the invisible architecture of the psyche. Imagine an architect standing before an empty field. To everyone else, there is nothing there, just open land. But inside the architect's mind, the building already exists. Every wall, every staircase, every window. Construction has not started, yet the design is already determining what will eventually stand upon that ground. Your unconscious works in much the same way. Long before your behavior changes, your inner questions have already begun designing the structure of your future. If your hidden question remains, what if I fail? Your attention naturally searches for obstacles. If the question becomes, what if I embarrass myself? You begin avoiding opportunities before they even arrive. If the question quietly asks, what if I am not enough? Every success feels temporary. Every compliment feels incomplete. Every achievement becomes another attempt to answer a question that can never truly be satisfied from the outside. This is why some people spend their entire lives chasing goals that never bring peace. The goal was never the destination. It was an unconscious attempt to silence an invisible question. But questions built from fear are impossible to satisfy through achievement. Because fear constantly moves the finish line. You finally reach one dream, only to discover another appears immediately. Not because ambition is wrong, because the unconscious is still asking the same question. Imagine trying to fill a cup that has a crack at its base. No matter how much water you pour inside, it never feels full. Most people respond by pouring faster, working harder, achieving more. comparing themselves constantly. Very few stop to examine the crack itself. Jung spent decades helping people do exactly that. He rarely rushed to provide answers. Instead, he became fascinated by the invisible questions beneath the suffering. A patient would speak for an hour about anxiety. Jung listened for the question. Someone described years of loneliness. Again, he listened for the question. Another spoke endlessly about failure. Still, he searched beneath the story, because beneath every recurring emotional struggle, there was usually one forgotten question quietly shaping the entire experience. Sometimes, the question had been inherited from childhood. Sometimes, from a painful relationship. Sometimes, from generations before. Without realizing it, people often spend their lives answering questions they never consciously chose. This may explain why certain breakthroughs feel almost miraculous. Nothing outside changes immediately. The same house, the same work, the same people. Yet everything feels different. Why? Because the question changed. Imagine walking through a forest carrying a compass that is always pointed in the wrong direction. Every decision you made seemed logical. Every path appeared reasonable. The problem was never your effort. The problem was your orientation. The moment the compass is corrected, the forest itself has not changed. But every future step leads somewhere entirely different. Consciousness works exactly like that. One new question can redirect an entire lifetime, not overnight, but quietly, almost invisibly. Instead of asking, "How do I prove my worth?" you begin asking, "What if my worth was never something that required proof?" Instead of, "Why do I always attract the wrong people?" you ask, "What part of me still believes unhealthy love feels familiar?" Instead of, "How do I become someone else?" you begin asking, "What part of myself have I spent years refusing to become?" Notice how these questions feel different. They do not seek quick solutions. They seek deeper awareness. And awareness changes behavior without force. Jung often observed that the greatest transformations occur naturally once consciousness becomes clear enough. You no longer need endless discipline to stop repeating certain patterns. You simply stop believing the story that sustained them. The energy once used to maintain illusion becomes available for life itself. That is the quiet miracle of psychological awakening. Not becoming more powerful than everyone else. Becoming honest enough that your inner world no longer needs to fight against itself. Perhaps your future has never depended only on the opportunities waiting ahead. Perhaps it has always depended on the quality of the questions you carry into tomorrow. Because every question is more than curiosity. Every question is a direction. And every direction eventually becomes a life. The question your soul has been waiting for. There comes a point in every person's life when the old questions stop working. Not because they have been answered, but because they no longer reach the place where transformation begins. For years, perhaps your mind has been asking, "How can I avoid pain? How can I make people understand me? How can I finally feel enough?" They seem like reasonable questions. Human questions. Questions almost everyone asks. Yet Carl Jung noticed something remarkable. The deeper the process of individuation became, the less interested people were in finding comforting answers. Instead, they became fascinated by uncomfortable truths. Imagine climbing a mountain. At the bottom, your attention is fixed on every obstacle, every loose stone, every difficult step. The higher you climb, something unexpected happens. Your perspective changes. The mountain has not become smaller. Your vision has become larger. Psychological awakening follows the same principle. The circumstances of your life may remain exactly the same, but the consciousness observing those circumstances becomes profoundly different. The person who once asked, "Why is this happening to me?" begins asking, "What is this asking of me?" That single change transforms suffering into dialogue. The world is no longer your enemy. It becomes your teacher. Jung often reminded his patients that life is not merely a sequence of external events. It is an ongoing conversation between consciousness and the unconscious. Every emotion, every dream, every unexpected encounter, every recurring pattern carries a message, not always an easy one, but always a meaningful one. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives trying to silence those messages. They distract themselves. They stay endlessly busy. They fill every quiet moment with noise, not because they enjoy distraction, but because silence asks questions that cannot be ignored. Have you noticed how uncomfortable true silence has become? The moment there is no music, no phone, no conversation, something begins moving inside. Old memories return. Forgotten emotions appear. Questions emerge that were buried beneath years of routine. Many people mistake this for anxiety. Sometimes, it is simply consciousness catching up with everything that has been postponed. Imagine a lake after a violent storm. While the wind is strong, the surface is chaotic. Nothing beneath can be seen. But the moment the storm passes, the water slowly becomes still. For the first time, you can see what has been resting at the bottom all along. The unconscious behaves in much the same way. It has never stopped speaking. Your life has simply been too noisy to hear it. This is why Jung valued solitude so deeply. Not because isolation is the goal, but because inner silence creates the conditions in which psychological truth can finally emerge. There are questions that only appear when no one else is speaking. Questions that no book can answer. Questions no teacher can resolve for you. Questions that belong entirely to your own soul. Who am I when nobody is watching? What part of myself am I still protecting from the light? Which dream belongs to me? And which one did I inherit from someone else's expectations? Those questions are frightening, because they cannot be answered intellectually. They must be lived. Jung understood that the unconscious is not interested in impressive theories. It responds to authenticity. You cannot deceive it. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot become whole by pretending. Sooner or later, every false identity begins to feel unbearably heavy. Every mask begins to suffocate the person beneath it. Eventually, the soul grows tired. Not tired of life, tired of pretending. Perhaps that exhaustion is not your weakness. Perhaps it is your invitation, an invitation to stop searching for another method, another strategy, another secret, and instead, to begin listening to the quiet question that has followed you since the beginning. Not, "What should I become?" but, "What has been trying to emerge through me all this time?" That question cannot be answered in one afternoon. It may take years, perhaps a lifetime. But something extraordinary happens the moment you ask it honestly. The unconscious stops feeling like a hidden enemy. It begins revealing itself as an ancient companion, patiently guiding you toward a life that no longer depends on performance, approval, or fear. Because the greatest question was never about changing your future. It has always been about discovering Who has been waiting inside you, long before the world told you who you needed to be? The answer has never been outside you. There is a quiet irony that follows almost every human life. People spend years searching for answers, without ever questioning the person who is asking. They search through books, through teachers, through success, through relationships, through achievements, through recognition, believing that somewhere, someone, will finally provide the answer that has been missing all along. Carl Jung spent his entire life guiding people toward a different realization. The most important answer is rarely something you discover. It is something you uncover. Because beneath every fear, every ambition, every disappointment, there is a deeper question patiently waiting to be recognized. Not by the world, by you. Imagine walking through an enormous maze. Every path appears different. Every turn seems important. You spend years trying to find the correct exit. Then one day, you climb high enough to see the maze from above. Suddenly, the confusion disappears. Not because the maze changed, because your perspective changed. Jung believed that consciousness works exactly the same way. The events of your life are often less important than the level of awareness from which you experience them. The same failure can become a prison or a doorway. The same heartbreak can become bitterness or wisdom. The same silence can become loneliness or peace. Everything depends on the consciousness that asks the question. Perhaps that is why the unconscious never rushes. It understands something the ego constantly forgets. Real answers arrive only when the person asking them has become capable of receiving them. Think about a child asking why the stars shine. An answer based on astrophysics would be correct, but meaningless. Not because the answer is wrong, because consciousness has not yet grown enough to hold it. The psyche follows the same principle. Life often withholds certain understandings, not as punishment, but as preparation. Many experiences only become meaningful years later. A rejection, a failure, a difficult goodbye, an unexpected ending. At the time, they seem random, even cruel. Only distance reveals the invisible thread connecting them. Jung often spoke about the mysterious intelligence of the psyche, not an intelligence that controls your future, but one that constantly seeks balance, again and again. Life invites you toward the places where you have become divided from yourself, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully, always patiently. Perhaps every recurring struggle has never been asking you to become stronger. Perhaps it has been asking you to become more honest. Honest about your fears. Honest about your desires. Honest about the masks you still wear. Honest about the dreams that were never truly yours. Because honesty creates something that force never can. Integration. The moment every forgotten part of yourself is finally allowed to exist, without shame, without denial, without performance, the inner conflict begins to dissolve. Not because life becomes easier, because you are no longer fighting yourself. There is an old image that perfectly captures Jung's philosophy. Imagine an orchestra preparing to perform. Each instrument plays beautifully, yet if every musician follows a different rhythm, the result is noise, not music. The human psyche is remarkably similar. Your fears, your hopes, your memories, your shadow, your persona, your dreams, your unconscious. None of them were ever meant to destroy one another. They were meant to become part of a single harmony. That harmony is what Jung called wholeness, not perfection. Wholeness. There is profound freedom in that word, because perfection always demands another achievement, another victory, another version of yourself. Wholeness asks for something completely different: presence, acceptance, awareness, the willingness to stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces, to stop running from your own complexity, to stop believing that becoming yourself requires eliminating everything imperfect. Perhaps that has been the greatest misunderstanding of all. Transformation is not the creation of a new person. It is the reunion with the person who has always existed beneath fear. Every question you have asked throughout this journey has slowly pointed toward the same place, not toward a destination, toward yourself. And maybe that has always been the purpose of the questions, not to produce immediate answers, but to awaken a deeper level of consciousness. Because the right question does something extraordinary. It interrupts unconscious living. It slows automatic reactions. It creates space between emotion and action. Within that space, freedom quietly appears. Not dramatic freedom, not the freedom promised by the world. The quieter kind, the freedom to observe instead of react, to choose instead of repeat, to understand instead of project, to remain present instead of escaping. That is where individuation begins, not in extraordinary moments, but in ordinary moments, experienced consciously. And perhaps, tomorrow morning, nothing outside your life will look different. The same room, the same responsibilities, the same people, the same routine. Yet one invisible change may already have begun. The questions you ask yourself may never be the same again. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" perhaps you will quietly ask, "What is this revealing about me?" Instead of, "How do I become someone worthy?" perhaps you will ask, "What part of me has always been worthy, even when I forgot it?" Instead of, "What answer will finally change my life?" perhaps you will realize the answer was never the beginning. The question was, because every transformation starts the same way, not with certainty, not with confidence, but with one honest question, asked by a person who is finally ready to hear the truth. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Carl Jung left for all of us. Your future is not determined by the answers you memorize. It is shaped quietly, patiently, every single day, by the questions you are courageous enough to ask yourself. And maybe the question that changes your entire life is the one you are finally willing to ask today.